Here to discuss the decline both of oil prices and what's going on Wall Street, Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro Pacific Capital. Peter, it is so good to have you back on America's Forum. And if memory serves, you were warning us when we last got together. Yeah, it's good news at the pump, but there are some economic implications, and we're seeing that now on Wall Street. Explain what's behind it.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's the falling oil price that is causing the stock market to go down. I think oil prices and the stock market are both going down for the same reason. And you have to understand that our phony recovery that the Fed erected, it did it on a foundation of quantitative easing and 0% interest rates. And those policies are theoretically coming to an end. And the asset bubbles that they supported are, running out of air. And so oil prices have already come down. Now stock prices are starting to come down because without quantitative easing we're going to have a bear market in stocks. We're going to have real estate prices going down. All these markets are going to be coming down. It's not just oil. So again, it's not about whether or not oil prices going down is good for the economy. It's about why oil prices are going down and why the decline is not going to be limited to the oil market, but all of the asset markets that were inflated by the Fed.
So, Peter, the new Congress begins today. If you were advising Congress members, what would you be telling them to focus on to improve our economy?
Well, they have to shrink the size of government. I mean, the government is the biggest burden on the economy, so they need to slash government spending. They need to cut substantially in entitlements. They need to shrink the federal workforce. They need to abolish a lot of regulations that have been implemented over the years. Of course, none of this is going to happen. The new Congress is simply going to grow the size of government further. They're going to increase the debt ceiling and keep on borrowing, so they're going to add to the economic misery that the average American is experiencing.
Well, Peter, we cannot mark you down as undecided when it comes to the agenda, what do you think is going to happen in the new Congress. But in the 2.5 minutes remaining, it appears now that both the House and Senate are willing to embrace an idea that Ron Paul had years ago and that I supported, the notion of auditing the Federal Reserve. You talk about quantitative easing. That's the economically sophisticated way to say the Fed printing more paper money. Is the audit of the Federal Reserve a good thing, or do you believe it to be largely cosmetic?
Well, look, I think it would be a good thing if we could have a legitimate, fair audit. I would question whether or not that would be the case, even if they were to enable it to happen. I don't necessarily trust the government, but I don't know that President Obama would even sign such legislation. And of course, the Federal Reserve and a lot of the Wall Street bankers are very much opposed to this, and they are the major donors to both sides of the political divide. So I don't know if we're going to get something like that passed anyway, because there's a lot of vested interests with a lot of money that don't want to shine a light on what's going on at the Federal Reserve.
Alan Greenspan said the economy won't fully recover until American companies invest more in productive assets and the housing market bounces back. Do you agree with that?
Partially. I think the U.S. economy won't recover until the Federal Reserve gets out of the way, until they allow interest rates to rise and allow the economic carnage that would result from that. You see, everything that the Federal Reserve has done since 2008, we haven't solved any of the structural problems that produced the financial crisis and the Great Recession. We've made them all worse. What we need to do is have the recession that the Fed cut short. We need to let interest rates go up, let stocks go down, let real estate go down, let big banks fail. We need to clean house. We need to let speculators lose money, and we need to force the federal government to dramatically reduce its size. But none of that is happening as long as the Federal Reserve is monetizing the debts and inflating these bubbles. And unfortunately, they're about to repeat their mistakes, because I think we're headed for QE4, because as the economic recovery disappears, as the markets start to go down, the Fed is going to cave in, and they're going to give the addicts on Wall Street exactly what they want, which is another fix of the monetary heroin.
And Peter, we will leave it right there. We're so pleased you're going to stay with us through the break, because we want to talk more about our nation taking its economic medicine now, so to speak, rather than delaying it. Stay with us. Let's continue here on America's Forum with Peter Schiff, the CEO of Euro Pacific Capital, Skyping in from Connecticut. Peter, it's so good to have you stay with us here. We began talking about energy prices. We may yet return to that theme. But as you were discussing the tough economic medicine our nation needs to take politically and really economically, I was thinking about what we hear about our allies in Japan. There they lament a lost decade. I'm just wondering, Peter, in the wake of the economic meltdown of 2008 and the Obama presidency, are we looking at a lost quarter century economically in the United States?
It quite possibly could be a lost generation in the United States, maybe longer. I hope it's not going to be a lost century. Hopefully, we're going to get the message before it's too late. But yeah, I mean, if you look at what's actually happening, the U.S. economy, the standard of living of the average American has been deteriorating, I would argue, for at least the last half century. If you go back to the 1950s, when the average American, without even a high school diploma, could support a family. You'd have a guy who maybe had a job, a blue-collar job. He had a wife that didn't have to work. He had maybe 4 kids. He didn't have any credit card debt. He owned a house. He owned a car. He could save for retirement. Today, I mean, you can't do any of that. Today, you need a college education now just to get a minimum wage job. And even then, you graduate with a lot of debt. Nobody can save for retirement. Everybody is broke. So I think the middle class has been dissipating. The American dream has turned into a nightmare. And, the situation keeps getting worse, and we pretend it's getting better.
Peter, some Republicans are hoping it's going to get better by passing the Keystone Pipeline. They've been talking about it for a while now. Do you think, and there's talk that it could bring 46,000 jobs, do you think that could help boost our economy?
No, again, this is the equivalent of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. We need major surgery here, right? Just putting a Band-Aid on something is not going to solve the problem. We need a Congress to go in there and dismantle this government monstrosity that has been erected over the years. That's what needs to happen. But unfortunately, all the new Republicans that we elected aren't going to do that. I mean, I was just watching on ABC this week. They had a couple of Republicans who were just elected to the U.S. Senate, and the anchor asked them, "Are you going to vote to increase the debt ceiling?" And they both said yes. I mean, what's the point of that? Why send Republicans to Washington if their goal is bigger deficits and more government? So, we've lost the battle before we even fought it. So the current Congress isn't going to do anything. I think, unfortunately, we're going to have a crisis on a much bigger scale, let's say, than the one that's going on in Russia right now with the dollar to force American politicians to reluctantly do what's right.
Well, we should point out for the record, Peter Schiff, that both you and I ran for the United States Senate in days past, but here we are back in private jobs, but we can talk with great candor about what might happen on Capitol Hill. If I'm hearing you right, you're saying that another meltdown a la 2008 could result in finally taking the right steps, but it would take a dramatic event to get Washington, whether the executive branch or the legislative branch or both, to finally heed the warnings. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, though, we're not going to get a repeat of 2008 because the Fed is not going to allow that kind of crisis. If they raised interest rates, that's exactly what would happen. We'd have a worse financial crisis than 2008. So to avoid that, they're not going to raise interest rates. Instead, they're going to launch QE4. But the consequence of that is going to be a currency crisis, a run on the dollar, a run on the U.S. bond market, which is going to be substantially worse, a much bigger disaster, far more painful to endure than any type of financial crisis that would have resulted from an increase in interest rates. But it's going to be that crisis that I think will force major change. Hopefully, it's going to be major change for the better, but there's always a chance it could be major change for the worse.
Peter, so for the viewers that are listening to this, it's kind of a downer, to say the least. What should we be doing then to help prevent what you're talking about? It's just,
there's nothing that we can do. We can't prevent it. I mean, this disaster is going to happen. The only thing that you can do is try to mitigate the damage to yourself, right, financially, to try to have your own assets invested properly, to own assets around the world, to own gold. I mean, I'm trying to help as many investors as possible to protect themselves. Now, in the aftermath of the crisis. There might be a lot that we can do to try to repair the damage and help steer the economy and the country back in the right direction towards free market capitalism and limited government and sound money. But we cannot stop the disaster, because the disaster is going to be the only catalyst for positive change. But people who understand the real problem need to be able to articulate it, because I know what's going to happen, just like what happened after the 2008 financial crisis. The powers that be at the central bank and in government, who are the engineers of this catastrophe, not on purpose, they're not smart enough to do it intentionally.
Sorry to have to stop you right there, but our time is up. Peter Schiff, thanks very much.